3 minutes before a torpedo cooks off inside his own submarine, Commander Slattery realizes the Navy has sent him here to die. Roughly 400 miles southwest of the Azores, 99 men who were promised they'd be home in 4 days are reading a flash message that makes no sense. Reverse course, hunt Soviet subs, push a vessel already strained by months at sea. The crew knows something's wrong. This detour extends a deployment that's already tested every system on board. But Slattery can't know what the families waiting on the Norfolk pier are about to learn. His submarine was never coming home. The Navy's underwater microphones recorded everything. 6 implosions, 18 seconds of hull collapse. Then they locked the tapes in a vault for 30 years. What those microphones captured, acoustic signatures that some investigators claim challenge the official mechanical failure narrative, is part of why the Navy kept portions of the record classified for decades, citing the protection of submarine detection capabilities. Because if the Scorpion's loss wasn't an accident, the questions that follow lead to places the Navy has never wanted to go. May 17, 1968. USS Scorpion departs Rota Naval Station in southern Spain, westbound for Norfolk, Virginia. The boat had famously skipped a major scheduled overhaul, with its S5W reactor having logged thousands of hours beyond its standard maintenance window, and her inventory of Mark 37 torpedoes was a decade old, standard for the submarine fleet, but aging nonetheless. Commander Slattery commands a crew of 99 submariners, most of them in their 20s. They have been at sea for 3 months tracking Soviet submarines in the Mediterranean, and the mood is eager. Home is 3,000 miles and 10 days away. Slattery plots a straight submerged run at 15 knots, surfacing only for radio checks. The boat is mechanically sound enough for a routine transit, and Norfolk expects her on May 27th. Slattery's plan is straightforward. Dive to 300 feet, maintain 15 knots, surface at regular intervals for periscope depth communications. The 3,000-mile crossing is well within the boat's capabilities. The nuclear reactor can operate for years without refueling. The crew settles into the transit watch schedule. 6 hours on, 12 hours off. In the torpedo room, the Mark 37 weapons sit cold and secured in their tubes. In the engine room, the reactor runs steady. The boat is quiet, efficient, and on schedule. For 3 days, everything goes exactly as planned. Then, the message comes. May 20. A flash message from Commander Submarine Force Atlantic orders Scorpion to reverse course and observe a Soviet naval group 200 miles southwest, adding 4 days to the transit and further straining the boat's already degraded mechanical systems. Slattery briefs his officers in the wardroom. The detour is non-negotiable, but it leaves them with no margin for mechanical trouble. The Soviet group is a surface flotilla, not a strategic threat, and the tasking feels like a last-minute intelligence request rather than an urgent operational priority. But orders are orders. Slattery reports the new estimated time of arrival, transmits his last known position, and takes the boat deep. Scorpion turns southwest and disappears from surface contact. At 300 feet, the boat levels off and settles into the new course. The crew knows the stakes. 4 extra days means 4 extra days of reactor runtime, 4 extra days burning battery reserves for maneuvering, and 4 extra days away from any port that could provide assistance if something breaks. Slattery chooses to stay deep and maintain radio silence rather than surface for frequent updates, prioritizing operational security over communication. The last message Norfolk receives is a position report. 400 miles southwest of the Azores, on station, all systems normal. Then Scorpion goes quiet. The families waiting in Virginia have no idea the boat is no longer coming straight home. Scorpion carries 6 Mark 37 torpedoes in her forward tubes. Each weapon weighs 1,430 pounds, carries a 330-pound HBX warhead, and uses a reserve battery that powers the motor and acoustic seeker. Once activated, the battery's chemical reaction cannot be stopped, leaving the crew with no choice but to jettison the weapon or risk catastrophic failure. The Mark 37 is a proven weapon, but it has a known flaw. If seawater leaks into the arming circuit or a short develops in the firing panel, the motor can spin up inside the tube. That is called a hot run, and it gives the crew a critical window, measured in minutes, not hours, to neutralize the threat before the situation becomes irreversible. Hot run incidents have plagued the Mark 37 fleet for years. Submarine crews have faced harrowing close calls with torpedoes that began spinning up unexpectedly, some reportedly flooding tubes and manually disconnecting battery leads with seconds to spare. Others choosing to emergency blow to the surface and jettison weapons rather than risk disarm procedures at depth. The most documented case occurred in 1960 aboard USS Sargo, where the crew narrowly averted disaster. The Navy issued revised protocols after each reported incident, but the fundamental problem, aging electrical insulation and corrosion-prone arming circuits, remained unsolved. By 1968, every submarine captain knows the Mark 37 is a weapon you watch carefully. Slattery's torpedoes are 10 years old. Scorpion is overdue for a yard period. Her trash disposal unit has jammed twice this deployment, requiring the crew to store refuse in the torpedo room. Her emergency ballast blow valves leaked during the last drill, forcing the chief of the boat to manually cycle them until they sealed. A hydraulic pump in the engine room has been cycling intermittently since Rota. Not a critical failure, but enough to generate noise that interferes with sonar operations. The boat is still operationally capable, but each of these discrepancies chips away at the margin between routine and emergency. Slattery has reported the issues up the chain, and Norfolk has scheduled a full maintenance availability for June. The boat just has to get home first. Submerged at Periscope depth to copy radio traffic, the crew maintains their watch. According to narrative reconstructions based on the boat's known maintenance history, a sonar operator may have noted faint machinery noise aft, possibly the same hydraulic pump that had been troublesome since Rota. If such a sound occurred, it would not have been loud enough to compromise the boat's acoustic signature, but it would have been persistent. In such a scenario, Slattery would have faced a choice: surface for a full diagnostic, risking exposure to Soviet patrol aircraft, or stay deep and maintain mission silence. Historical accounts suggest he would have chosen silence. The surveillance tasking would take priority over a maintenance concern that did not yet threaten the boat's ability to dive or maneuver. Whether real or reconstructed, the image haunts investigators. A pump continuing to cycle, a sonar operator logging routine noise. Moving on. In hindsight, questions about such decisions will be debated for decades. Submerged transit imposes a communication blackout. UHF radio requires periscope depth for message reception. And, according to standard patrol protocols, Slattery likely surfaces approximately once every 24 hours for brief transmissions. This means any new orders or warnings from Norfolk can sit unread for up to a full day. If a Soviet submarine reverses course and begins actively hunting Scorpion, the boat will not know until its own sonar detects the threat. If the Navy discovers new intelligence about the Soviet flotilla, such as the presence of anti-submarine helicopters or depth-charge-equipped destroyers, Slattery will not receive that update until the next scheduled radio check. The protocol trades real-time information for stealth, and in Cold War submarine operations, stealth usually wins. But it also means Scorpion is operating in an information vacuum. May 22, 1844. Zulu. SOSUS hydrophones in the Canary Basin detect a single, sharp acoustic transient, consistent with a torpedo motor start or a small hull rupture. The signal is brief, less than 2 seconds, and the frequency signature matches mechanical noise rather than an explosion. At the time, no one is watching. The hydrophone network is designed to track Soviet submarines, not monitor every acoustic anomaly in real time. The recording is captured automatically, stored on magnetic tape, awaiting analysis that won't come for days. 91 seconds later, a second, louder event appears on the same bearing. But in that moment, no alarm sounds. No supervisor is called. The significance of those 91 seconds will only become clear when analysts, days later, are tasked with a grim mission: finding the moment a submarine died. According to one reconstruction of the incident, a Mark 37 torpedo in Tube 4 may have begun spinning up. Whether due to a short circuit in the firing panel or seawater intrusion into the arming circuit is never confirmed. Investigators believe a torpedo man's mate would have heard the motor first, a high-pitched whine rising in frequency as the propeller accelerates inside the flooded tube. Standard procedures would have required him to immediately call the control room and initiate the emergency disarm checklist. Disconnect external power, vent the tube to equalize pressure, manually rotate the warhead safety interlock. All of this must happen within 3 minutes, before the weapon's acoustic seeker goes active and begins searching for a target. The clock starts. The crew moves fast. The torpedo man's mate disconnects the external power cable and verifies that the motor is still running, which means the weapon is now on internal battery power and cannot be shut down from outside the tube. According to standard procedure, he would need to vent the tube to equalize pressure with the torpedo room interior, a necessary step before the breech door can be safely unlocked. The pressure gauge climbs as air hisses through the system. Meanwhile, a second sailor retrieves the manual disarm tool from its locker, a long steel rod with a T-handle designed to reach through the open breech and engage the warhead safety interlock. If they can rotate that interlock 90 degrees, the weapon will be mechanically safed even if the battery continues to run. The procedure has been drilled dozens of times. The crew knows what to do, but it takes time. The acoustic record shows a series of transients during the final moments. According to some analyses, a second, louder event occurred roughly 90 seconds after the first, consistent with an internal explosion or a rapid pressure change inside the hull. The waveform is more complex this time, a sharp initial spike followed by a longer decay, suggesting a blast wave propagating through water and then reflecting off a solid surface. Later analysis would suggest this signature resembled a hull breach rather than a mechanical failure. The official record shows SOSUS data wasn't identified as Scorpion until days after the submarine failed to arrive in Norfolk. But the acoustic evidence itself tells a different story. The hydrophones recorded a third event, then a fourth. They were hearing a submarine die. SOSUS records 4 more acoustic events over the next 180 seconds, each one progressively quieter than the last. The pattern suggests sequential compartment collapse. Forward spaces first, then the battery compartment, then the machinery spaces aft. The final acoustic signature, a low-frequency rumble, is believed by some analysts to correspond to the hull's final descent or impact with the seabed. Then the hydrophones go silent. No distress call is transmitted. No emergency locator beacon activates. Scorpion simply vanishes from the acoustic record at approximately 1844 Zulu, 400 miles southwest of the Azores. The SOSUS network continues its automated recording, though at the depths where Scorpion was lost, survival was physically impossible. No further sounds are detected. They never found the Scorpion intact. What they found were pieces, twisted metal that told a story investigators didn't want to believe. Because if a Mark 37 hot runs inside its tube, the physics become inevitable. The massive torque of a hot-running torpedo with nowhere to go. The motor torque doesn't just rattle, it attacks the tube's inner liner, hunting for the weakest point, the breech door weld. Crack that seal, and the torpedo room floods in seconds. But flooding is the merciful option. If that 330-pound HBX warhead detonates, you're not talking about water anymore. You're talking about a blast wave moving at 26,000 feet per second, faster than the steel itself can deform. The hull doesn't bend, it shatters. Brittle fracture along existing stress points near the battery compartment. And here's what makes it so catastrophic. The explosion doesn't even need to puncture the hull directly. It just needs to concentrate stress at a single weld seam. One frame joint. At 300 feet. Down. The hull is already fighting 130 pounds per square inch of external pressure. Under such immense pressure, a minor breach can expand with terrifying speed. The sea does the rest. Alternatively, if the torpedo launched and circled back, its acoustic seeker would lock onto Scorpion's own reactor coolant pumps. The Mark 37's passive sonar listens for machinery noise in the 80 to 200 Hz range, exactly the frequency of a submarine's main coolant loop. Once locked, the weapon homes on that signal at approximately 26 knots, its documented maximum speed. The resulting hit amidships would rupture both the pressure hull and the ballast tanks, initiating uncontrolled descent. Proponents of this theory argue it explains why the SOSUS recording shows the first acoustic event separate from the implosion sequence. The weapon detonates outside the hull, breaches it, and the boat begins sinking. The crew would have seconds to react before flooding overwhelms the bilge pumps and the boat drops below safe depth. At 1,300 feet, Scorpion's estimated crush depth, seawater pressure reaches 580 pounds per square inch. Any pre-existing crack or buckled frame concentrates stress at that point, and the hull implodes in a cascade. Historical search theories, notably those advanced by Dr. John Craven, proposed a sequential collapse, the forward compartment going first, with the pressure differential forcing the bulkhead inward, compressing the air inside until it ruptures into the next space, the battery compartment, then the reactor compartment, then the machinery spaces, and finally the stern. However, more recent acoustic forensics suggest the main hull likely failed nearly simultaneously. Each compartment's implosion would have been distinct because each has a different volume and structural configuration. According to historical search models, SOSUS recorded a series of acoustic events spanning approximately 3 minutes, which were interpreted at the time as this forward-to-aft sequence of structural failures as the boat sank and pressure increased. The 6 distinct sounds recorded by SOSUS support both the hot run and the circling torpedo theories, because both scenarios produce the same final result: catastrophic pressure hull breach, followed by uncontrolled descent and sequential implosion. The difference lies in the first acoustic event. A hot run detonation inside the tube generates a sharp, high-frequency transient, consistent with an internal explosion. A torpedo impact on the outer hull generates a lower frequency thump, followed by a secondary blast as the warhead detonates against the pressure hull. SOSUS recorded a sharp transient, but the frequency resolution is not fine enough to distinguish definitively between the two. That ambiguity is why the Navy has never committed to a single cause. The acoustic data proves the boat imploded, but it cannot prove why the implosion started. A third theory circulated inside the Navy, but was never officially endorsed: Soviet retaliation. 2 months before Scorpion sank, the Soviet Golf-class submarine K-129 disappeared in the Pacific. The Navy tracked her sinking with the same SOSUS network and later sent USS Halibut to photograph the wreck. If Soviet intelligence discovered that the United States had located K-129, or if they suspected American involvement in her loss, Scorpion could have been targeted as payback. This theory explains why the Navy classified the SOSUS recordings for 30 years, and why internal memos explored the possibility of external attack. But no Soviet submarine was detected within 100 miles of Scorpion's last known position, and the acoustic signature does not match a torpedo launched from another boat. The theory remains plausible, but unproven. May 27, 1968. Scorpion fails to arrive at Norfolk. Families gather at the pier, watching the empty harbor. The Navy begins emergency protocols within hours, though the exact timeline of internal alerts versus public notification remains unclear. At 1800 hours, Commander Submarine Force Atlantic activates the search and rescue protocol and dispatches 2 destroyers to Scorpion's last known position. But that position is 5 days old, and the boat could have traveled 1,800 miles in any direction since then. The search area is impossibly large. The families are told only that Scorpion is overdue and that the Navy is investigating. No mention is made of the SOSUS recordings. No one uses the word lost. The SOSUS network analyst reviews the May 22nd acoustic recordings and isolates what appears to be a multi-event sequence. Different technical analyses would later break it down into distinct phases of structural failure. He briefs the admiral in charge of submarine operations. The signature is consistent with catastrophic structural failure, but he cannot rule out torpedo explosion or external attack without visual wreckage inspection. The timestamps place the events shortly after 1840 Zulu, 5 days before Scorpion was due in Norfolk. During the period, she was expected to maintain radio silence between her 24-hour check-ins. The hydrophone triangulation fixes the location to within a 10-mile circle, 400 miles southwest of the Azores. The Admiral orders the SOSUS data classified and authorizes a deep ocean search. Under standard search and rescue protocols for an overdue submarine, the Navy must assume the possibility of survivors in an intact compartment until proven otherwise. The race is on. The Navy dispatches USS Mizar, a civilian-crewed oceanographic research vessel equipped with deep ocean sonar and a towed camera sled. The search area is 400 square miles based on SOSUS triangulation, but the wreck lies at roughly 9,800 feet, beyond the reach of any rescue vehicle, even if survivors are found. Mizar begins a systematic grid pattern, dragging side-scan sonar back and forth across the seafloor. The water is too deep for divers, and the camera sled can only cover a few hundred yards per pass. It is slow, methodical work. Weeks pass with no contact. The families hold vigils. The Navy says nothing about the acoustic evidence. By July, everyone knows there will be no rescue. The search becomes a recovery mission. Find the wreck, determine the cause. 5 months after Scorpion vanished, Mizar's cameras locate the wreck. The hull is shattered into 3 main sections scattered across 600 yards of seafloor, indicating violent energy release rather than gradual flooding. The sail is torn off and lying on its side. The operations compartment is largely obliterated, while the aft section appears to have telescoped forward into the auxiliary machinery room. Debris is everywhere. Personal belongings, machinery fragments, sections of piping. The camera sled makes multiple passes, photographing the wreck from every angle. Investigators focus on the torpedo room. The forward compartment appears deformed by immense pressure, though it remained relatively intact compared to the rest of the hull. Some observers claim evidence of a torpedo malfunction is visible in the images, while official Navy reports describe the torpedo room as having flooded before reaching crush depth. Whether any detonation occurred inside or outside the hull cannot be determined from the images alone. Investigators photograph Tube 4 repeatedly. The breech door, a 200-pound steel hatch that seals the torpedo tube's inner end, is gone. The mounting bolts are sheared off, and the frame is bent outward, suggesting the door was blown into the torpedo room by internal pressure rather than ripped off by implosion. If a hot-run detonation occurred inside the tube, the blast would have driven the breech door inward with enough force to rupture the opposite bulkhead. But the warhead compartment is also crushed inward, which is consistent with external pressure from implosion. The physical evidence points in 2 directions simultaneously. The Navy photographs everything, recovers what small debris can be lifted, and surfaces with more questions than answers. The Navy's Court of Inquiry, which had begun meeting in June 1968, issues 3 separate findings over 2 years. The official report blames a hot-run torpedo in Tube 4, citing the missing breech door and the acoustic timeline. But some researchers claim that internal Navy discussions explored Soviet retaliation for the K-129 incident, noting that Scorpion's Detour put her in range of Soviet naval assets. A third theory, structural fatigue cracks in the hull frame, is considered and rejected due to lack of supporting wreckage evidence. No single explanation accounts for all the forensic and acoustic data. The court concludes that Scorpion was lost due to a catastrophic event of undetermined origin. The families are told the Navy did everything possible to determine the cause. The SOSUS recordings remain classified. Within 6 months, the Navy makes a choice. Every change they roll out is a silent confession, an admission that these fixes could have been made before 99 men died. They retrofit all Mark 37 torpedoes with fail-safe battery interlocks that physically disconnect power if the weapon is not fully armed through the firing panel. The technology existed. They simply hadn't installed it. Submarine captains are now authorized to abort surveillance missions if maintenance discrepancies exceed defined thresholds, a direct response to Scorpion's deferred yard period. The policy acknowledges what everyone already knew. They had sent her out anyway. Procedural changes reportedly included more rigorous disarm steps and revised emergency response timelines. SOSUS protocols are updated to flag any multi-event acoustic sequence immediately, rather than logging it for later review. Each reform is a gravestone. By December 1969, these changes are implemented fleet-wide. The lessons learned. From Scorpion, save lives on subsequent patrols, even though the cause of her loss remains officially unresolved. The Navy closes the case, but never answers the question: why did it take a disaster to do what should have been done from the beginning? Families of the 99 lost crew form an advocacy group, demanding declassification of the SOSUS recordings and the full Court of Inquiry transcripts. They file Freedom of Information Act requests in 1975, 1985, and again in 1998. Each time, the Navy releases partial transcripts, with key sections redacted under national security exemptions. The SOSUS acoustic data is not declassified until 1993, 25 years after the disaster. Even then, the waveforms are provided without the technical analysis that would explain what the sounds mean. Families argue that the Navy knows more than it has disclosed, and that the official hot run explanation is a cover story. As of 2025, portions of the investigation remain sealed, and no additional evidence has been released. The eerie coincidence remains. The Soviet Union lost K-129 in April 1968, and the United States lost Scorpion in May 1968. 2 nuclear submarines vanishing within 6 weeks of each other during the height of the Cold War. Some analysts believe the losses were unrelated mechanical failures, a statistical inevitability given the operational tempo of both fleets. Others point to the classified nature of both investigations and the lack of definitive findings as evidence of deliberate concealment. The truth is that both navies operated aging submarines with inadequate maintenance in hostile environments, and both paid the price. Whether those losses were connected by espionage, retaliation, or simply bad luck is a question the classified files may never answer. Scorpion's wreck remains on the seafloor at 9,800 feet, still contaminated by reactor fuel and unexploded ordnance. The Navy prohibits further dives, citing both environmental risk and the instability of the corroded hull structure. In 1985 and again in 2000, remote cameras photographed the site to monitor changes. Observers note the massive structural damage caused by the initial implosion, with some sections now partially obscured by sediment. The torpedo room is now almost entirely buried. Whatever final evidence might resolve the cause of the disaster is entombed with the boat. 99 men died in the 3 minutes between the first acoustic event and the final implosion. Their families still wait for the full truth. The Navy has moved on. The ocean has not.